There is a type of person that has become extremely common in modern life. They are not wealthy, but they look wealthy. A newer car parked outside a modest apartment, vacation photos appearing on social media every few months, a new phone, a few expensive dinners, occasional hints about investments. From the outside, everything seems fine. But step into their world late at night, when the phone screen goes dark and the room becomes quiet. The story changes. That is when the numbers begin to show themselves. A credit card statement, a car payment, a rent increase that arrived last month. And somewhere between those numbers lives a familiar feeling that millions of young adults carry every day. A quiet weight. The strange sense that money arrives and disappears almost immediately. There is a psychological state many people live in today, even if they never give it a name. Call them prisoners of appearance. No one forced them to buy the car. No one required them to rent the nicer apartment. No one demanded the lifestyle they now maintain online. Yet somehow, they still did it. Not because they truly wanted it, but because it felt expected. In a world where everything is visible, income, vacations, purchases, promotions, silence begins to feel uncomfortable. Silence can feel like falling behind, and so a cycle begins. A cycle so subtle that most people never notice it. Income increases, spending increases, visibility increases, but real wealth barely moves. Here is the paradox of modern society. The people who look the richest are often not the richest at all, and the people who truly possess wealth rarely appear that way. They drive ordinary cars. They live in unremarkable homes. They rarely speak about money. Not because they lack it, but because they understand something that most people overlook. Attention has a cost. The moment financial details become public, invisible pressures begin to form. Friends begin comparing. Family members begin expecting. Someone eventually asks for help. Another asks for a loan. Advice arrives that was never requested. And slowly, money stops being a tool of freedom. It becomes a performance, something that must be maintained, an image that must be protected. There is a moment many people experience but rarely talk about. It usually arrives quietly, not after a major crisis, but after years of subtle exhaustion. One morning, they look at their bank account and wonder, why am I working this hard and still feel financially fragile? On the other side of that question exists a different kind of person. Call them the quiet builders. They are not trying to look wealthy. They are not trying to impress anyone. They are doing something far less visible. They are building assets silently. No announcements, no bragging, no audience. Just a system operating quietly behind an ordinary life. And the surprising part is this. That system rarely begins with a massive investment. It rarely begins with a dramatic life decision. It usually begins with something very small, something so ordinary that most people ignore it. Yet that small shift often becomes the dividing line between two completely different financial futures. Because the real question is not, how can more money be earned? The deeper question is, how can money start working before it has a chance to disappear? And the answer to that question begins with something unexpected, not motivation, not discipline, but a simple insight from behavioral psychology, an insight that can transform wealth building into something that happens almost automatically. But to understand it, another truth must be faced first, a truth that surprises many people when they first recognize it. The biggest financial problem most people have is not income. It is the thousands of tiny decisions made every single day. And that is exactly where everything begins to change. One of the biggest misunderstandings about money is the belief that financial success comes from knowledge. People assume that if they understand investing, understand the stock market, understand compound interest, everything will eventually work out. But reality tells a different story. Millions of people know they should save. Millions of people know they should invest. Millions of people know they should avoid unnecessary spending. Yet they still struggle to do it. Not because they lack information, but because they are fighting something much more subtle. Decision fatigue. An ordinary day begins with choices. What to eat, what to wear, which messages to answer, which tasks to complete first. By evening, the brain has already made hundreds of decisions. And then money enters the picture. Save or spend, invest or wait, upgrade or delay. At that point, the brain tends to choose the easiest option, immediate comfort. Not because discipline is missing, but because willpower has limits. That is why so many people begin saving and eventually stop, begin investing and slowly drift away. Not because their plan was wrong, but because their plan required constant decisions, and decisions drain energy. But the people who quietly build wealth approach the problem differently. They do not try to become super disciplined. They do something far simpler. They remove the decision entirely. Instead of asking themselves every month whether money should be saved, the decision happens automatically. A transfer leaves a paycheck before it even feels available. The future self gets paid first. The present self receives whatever remains, and something remarkable begins to happen. When money disappears into investments before it can be spent, the entire psychological battle disappears. No budgeting debate, no emotional negotiation, no guilt, just quiet consistency. There was once a school teacher who set up a small transfer, just $50 each week, into an investment account. Not a large amount, barely noticeable. Weeks passed, months passed, years passed. Eventually, she joked that she could not even remember the password to the account anymore. She never needed to check it because the system was doing the work. While others relied on motivation, she relied on structure. And structure is powerful because motivation fades, structure remains. This is where the philosophy of quiet wealth truly begins, not with dramatic sacrifices, not with extreme frugality, but with systems that operate quietly in the background. Money moving automatically, investments growing silently, life continuing normally. And from the outside, nothing appears unusual. Friends see the same lifestyle, the same routine, the same ordinary life. What they do not see is the invisible machinery operating underneath. Every week, every month, every year, a slow accumulation of assets. No excitement, no attention, just compounding. And this is where the path of the quiet builder truly diverges from the prisoner of appearance. One life is driven by visibility. The other is driven by systems. One spends energy maintaining an image. The other spends energy constructing freedom. Over time, the gap between those two lives becomes enormous. Yet to everyone watching from the outside, both people look almost identical, which leads to a question most people rarely ask themselves. If wealth can grow quietly, invisibly, without attention, then why do so many people feel the need to show it? And more importantly, what would happen if the entire strategy of money changed from impressing others to quietly building options? Because once that shift begins, a completely different financial life starts to unfold. And it begins with something that looks surprisingly ordinary. A simple system running quietly in the background. Once the quiet builder understands the power of systems, life begins to look different. Not dramatically different, just slightly altered. The outside world remains almost unchanged. The same commute to work, the same small apartment, the same casual conversations with friends. But beneath the surface, something subtle has shifted. Money now follows a different path. Instead of flowing outward the moment it arrives, a portion quietly disappears into the background, automatically. No announcement, no emotional debate, no heroic act of discipline. Just a quiet transfer that happens the day after a paycheck arrives. It is almost invisible, and that is exactly why it works. There is a strange psychological effect that happens when money moves before we ever see it, when it never sits in the checking account, when it never becomes part of the available balance. The brain simply adapts. Life continues with what remains. Rent gets paid, groceries get bought, dinner still happens with friends, and yet, somewhere in the background, assets begin forming. Small at first, almost laughably small, but consistency has a strange kind of power. Consider two people living nearly identical lives. Both earn roughly the same salary, both live in the same city, both work similar hours. From the outside, they look indistinguishable, But their relationship with money follows two different patterns. The first lives inside the cycle most people know. Money arrives, spending expands, the month ends, the account resets. The second person, the quiet builder, lets a small portion disappear before the month even begins. $20, $50, maybe $100. Not enough to feel dramatic, but enough to create momentum. Years pass, and slowly an invisible structure begins forming. A portfolio that no one talks about, an account that no one asks about, a quiet stack of assets that grows while life continues normally. The interesting part is that most people around them never notice. Friends assume nothing has changed. Coworkers assume they earned the same as before. Family assumes life is moving at the same pace. Because externally, it is. The quiet builder still drives a normal car, still orders normal meals, still complains about traffic like everyone else. But the internal landscape has changed. The prisoner of appearance spends energy protecting an image. The quiet builder spends energy protecting momentum. And protecting momentum requires something many people overlook: privacy. Talking about money invites attention. Attention invites expectations. Expectations invite pressure. A raise gets mentioned casually during dinner. Suddenly, people start calculating what should be affordable. A successful investment gets shared. Now everyone wants advice or a loan. A bonus gets hinted at. Family members begin imagining what help might be possible. And little by little, financial independence becomes tangled in social obligation. The quiet builder avoids that trap entirely. When asked about money, the answers remain simple. Doing all right, nothing exciting, just working. The numbers stay private, not out of secrecy, but out of protection. Because the moment money becomes a public topic, it stops belonging entirely to the person who earned it. And something fascinating begins to happen when wealth grows. Quietly, without attention, without comparison, without pressure. Financial decisions become clearer, simpler, cleaner. Money returns to its original purpose, a tool, not a performance. Yet one question still remains. If small automated systems can quietly build wealth, what about the biggest financial decisions people make? Housing, cars, lifestyle. Because these choices often shape a financial life far more than any investment account ever will. And that is where the next realization begins. Most financial struggles do not begin with bad investments. They begin with lifestyle decisions. Not dramatic ones, just slightly larger choices. A slightly nicer apartment, a slightly newer car, a slightly more expensive neighborhood. Each decision seems harmless in isolation. After all, life is meant to improve. Raises happen, promotions arrive. It feels natural that lifestyle should grow alongside income. And slowly, almost invisibly, something called lifestyle creep begins. The apartment upgrade feels justified. The car upgrade feels overdue. Dining out becomes more frequent. Subscriptions quietly multiply. None of it feels reckless, but taken together, these upgrades quietly consume every financial gain. Income rises, but freedom does not. The prisoner of appearance lives inside the cycle. Every improvement in income creates a matching improvement in lifestyle. Every promotion unlocks a new category of spending, and within a few years, the financial pressure remains exactly the same, just at a higher level. The quiet builder takes a different path, not by rejecting comfort, not by living miserably, but by delaying expansion. When income rises, life stays the same, at least for a while. 6 months, sometimes a year, sometimes longer. From the outside, this looks strange. Friends begin upgrading apartments. Colleagues arrive with new cars. Social media fills with lifestyle milestones. Meanwhile, the quiet builder appears unchanged, still sharing a place with roommates, still driving the same car, still living inside the same routine. But behind that stillness, something powerful is happening. The extra income has not disappeared. It has simply been redirected into investments, into assets, into quiet systems that generate more money. And eventually, something remarkable begins to happen. Those assets begin producing income of their own. Dividends, interest, side projects, small streams of money that arrive without requiring additional hours of work. The prisoner of appearance upgrades first and hopes income will catch up later. The quiet builder builds income first and upgrades later, years later. When the upgrade finally happens, it no longer depends on a salary, it depends on assets. And that difference changes everything. A nicer apartment paid partly by investments feels different. A car purchased without payments feels different. A lifestyle supported by assets feels calm, not fragile, not performative, just sustainable. And perhaps the most surprising part of this transformation is how ordinary it looks from the outside. The quiet builder still blends into everyday life, still looks like everyone else, still moves through the world without attracting attention. But behind that ordinary life lies something most people never see: options, freedom, security. And this leads to another quiet realization. Some of the most powerful financial advantages are the ones nobody notices, because when wealth remains invisible, it continues growing without interruption, which raises a final question that few people ever consider. If wealth can grow quietly for years without anyone noticing, how powerful could that become after a decade? There is a moment in the life of every quiet builder when something subtle becomes clear. Wealth does not usually grow through dramatic breakthroughs. It grows through architecture, a structure quietly built over time, not visible, not impressive to outsiders, but extremely powerful once enough time passes. Most people imagine wealth as a single big event, a successful investment, a business that suddenly takes off, a lucky opportunity. But the truth is far less dramatic. Wealth is usually the result of dozens of small protections placed around money, protections that prevent it from leaking away. Consider something almost everyone overlooks: monthly subscriptions, streaming services, premium apps, gym memberships that are rarely used, delivery services, upgraded versions of everything. Each one feels harmless. $10 here, $20 there. No single charge feels large enough to question. But when these small leaks accumulate, something interesting happens. $300 disappears every month, sometimes $500. And because each charge feels small, the brain barely notices. But time notices. Over the course of 20 years, even a modest amount like $500 a month becomes something much larger. Not because the amount is extraordinary, but because time quietly multiplies it. The quiet builder understands something simple. Money rarely disappears through one catastrophic mistake. It disappears through small, invisible leaks. And so, every few months, the quiet builder performs a quiet ritual, an audit. Subscriptions are reviewed. Expenses are questioned. Not harshly, not obsessively, just honestly. Anything that does not add real value disappears. Not out of deprivation, but out of clarity. Because every recurring expense competes with a future asset. And once this awareness develops, another realization appears. Safety is more valuable than excitement. The prisoner of appearance chases financial excitement, new investments, new trends, new speculation. Crypto one year, day trading the next. Some win, many lose, but almost everyone spends enormous emotional energy trying to beat the market. The quiet builder chooses something far less exciting: broad market investments, diversified funds, slow, consistent contributions. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic. So boring that nobody even asks about it. And that boredom becomes a powerful advantage. Because while others chase attention, the quiet builder quietly compounds, year after year, decade after decade. And somewhere along that quiet journey, another structure quietly forms: an emergency fund. 6 months of living expenses sitting quietly in a high-yield account. It does not produce excitement, it does not produce admiration, but it produces something far more valuable: peace. Because life eventually surprises everyone. A job disappears, a medical bill arrives, a car suddenly stops working. The prisoner of appearance meets these moments with panic. The quiet builder meets them with preparation. And interestingly, this safety net remains invisible to the outside world. Nobody knows it exists. Friends do not assume financial help is available. Family members do not begin calculating what could be borrowed. The emergency fund stays private. Not because generosity disappears, but because boundaries protect both money and relationships. And slowly, something remarkable begins to emerge. Multiple quiet streams of income, dividends from investments, side projects under a business name, royalties from creative work, small flows of money that appear without announcing themselves. Individually, each stream seems minor, but together, they form resilience, a structure where income no longer depends entirely on a single paycheck. And when enough time passes, the quiet builder reaches a moment that once felt impossible. Work becomes a choice, not an obligation. From the outside, nothing looks different. The same modest lifestyle, the same quiet routines, the same ordinary appearance. But internally, everything has changed. Because behind that ordinary life lies something rare. Freedom that does not need to be displayed, wealth that does not need to be proven, and perhaps the most powerful realization of all, the richest life is often the one that nobody feels the need to show. Which leads to the final question. If wealth grows best in silence, what happens after 10 years of living this way?